what I think is a groundbreaking initiative, the Syrian Freedom Charter. Taking us through the charter is Rafif Jouejati. Rafif is the director of the FREE-Syria Foundation, and absolutely delighted. If you can give your round of applause for Rafif actually being here. I'm really, really pleased. I'm not going to say too much about the charter. That's Rafif's job. So without any further delay, I know we started a little bit late. I'll hand you over to Rafif.
So thank you, Kristyan. Thank you, everybody, for making the time to come. And a special thanks to Amnesty International for hosting us. I talk about Syria a lot, and I find myself constantly reminding people about paralyzing statistics. 250,000 people dead, millions displaced, homeless, refugeed. So many children who have not had an education for the past 4 years. And tonight I'm especially pleased because I get a chance to talk about something very positive and forward-looking, and something that represents some hope for Syrians, not just in Syria, but around the world. So I think Amnesty has provided a copy of the Freedom Charter on your seats.
Looks like that, yeah.
It's a short read, it's a quick read, but it carries a lot of meaning for us. And I'll walk you through the history very, very quickly, and then maybe have some questions and answers and comments. A few years ago, I was working with groups of Syrian activists, and we were trying to find ways of promoting creative, nonviolent resistance. We were looking for ways for Syrians to express themselves. And what I noticed was recurring throughout Syria, activists were saying what they didn't want, without really specifying what they wanted. The calls for freedom or dignity or justice stopped right there without really going into the broader definition. And during one of our workshops, we had the pleasure of having Dr. Howard Barrell with us, and he talked about the South African Freedom Charter. And when I heard about that, I thought, my gosh, we need this in Syria. We need a statement by the people, for the people. And so we launched into a campaign to secure funding, to collect activists who could perform the work. And we took about a year with more than 100 activists, some from the local coordination committees in Syria. And if you're not familiar with them, they are one of the largest grassroots networks in country. Some independent activists, and we went through training, how to devise a survey instrument, how to administer the survey with objectivity, how to not react if you got an answer you didn't like, how to respect people's opinions, and how to approach people whose opinions had never been solicited. And so over the course of the year, we managed to collect more than 50,000 surveys. The vast majority of those 50,000 were done in Syria, in every governorate. And for those of you who are Syrian, I suspect you can imagine the magnitude of work. For those of you who have an interest in Syria, you must understand what it is to discuss concepts of freedom in face-to-face surveys in areas that are either under regime control or the control of extremists. Neither side wants discussions about freedom or personal dignity or human rights. So this was a monumentous body of work. The results are contained in a report that we are going to make public. When we finished the surveys, we sent it out for an independent analysis. But we also looked at the responses, and where we saw 50% or greater consensus on the questions and answers, we set them aside. And as we got through the more than 50,000, we developed what is the Freedom Charter. And this is not meant to be a constitution. This is meant to help contribute to a future Syrian constitution. The surveys were conducted randomly, wherever we could. They were conducted in areas under regime control. They were conducted in areas under other control. They were conducted by ordinary civilians, and the respondents were ordinary civilians. We didn't look to intellectuals or politicians because those people make their opinions known very frequently. We looked to the average man and woman who apparently doesn't have a voice, where the international narrative is focused on ISIS or the Assad regime. Too often we overlook the space in between and the millions of Syrian civilians who want a better future, who want education for their children, who want the freedom to buy bread. Just like you or me or any of us, they want a normal life. And so I hope you'll read through the charter. I hope you'll read through the report once we get it on our website. I hope you'll follow us on Twitter to keep up with the developments. And I hope you'll help us move into the next phase of the Freedom Charter, which is what we're calling the Extension Project. In the Extension Project, we want to create a mechanism whereby we can solicit the opinions and comments of Syrians around the world. Every Syrian should have a voice. We are asking Syrians to read the charter, read the report, comment, disagree, and if you agree, please sign it. If we can set the goal of getting 1 million signatures to the Syrian Freedom Charter, then we can take this to the Friends of Syria and the not Friends of Syria and the entire international community, and we can say, we understand that there are geopolitical decisions being made on our behalf, but you must listen to the voice of the people. All right? So I think that's really what the message I came to deliver, and I welcome feedback and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafif. I think that's a good starting point, a good overview to delve into this. And, you know, like Rafif said, you've got the charter on your chairs. What you haven't got is this report. And this is a treasure trove of data and statistics on what people think inside Syria. And it'd be good to see further analysis of this and put this on the website as well. We're going to open it up for discussion, 50 minutes, 60 minutes or so. There's a reception afterwards. I should say as well, obviously you probably noticed the event is being filmed. When we do come to the Q&A bit, if you do want to ask a question but don't want to be on camera, just hold up the leaflets when you're holding your hand up as well, and then the camera crew will know not to film your face, just so we're aware of that as well. That was a good overview. But this is a massive operation, actually, when you break it down. The amount of interviews that you've done. It'd be good to just break down a little bit the logistics of how you went about doing this, especially in areas which are controlled by the regime or controlled by forces on the opposition side that actually would be opposed to a lot of the stuff that you're talking about in the charter. That would be interesting to hear about as well.
Sure, the logistics were a nightmare. This was very dangerous work for everybody who participated. And you're absolutely right, Kristyan. Some of the extremist forces are not interested in how we're getting opinions. What do you mean you want to collect opinions? What do you mean it's called a freedom charter? This goes against what they stand for. And by the same token, in regime-occupied areas, this is treasonous. This is civil disobedience of the highest order. So it was extremely challenging. For activists who did not have cell phones, we provided cell phones. We worked with a software developer to use an app on the cell phones where people could record their interviews and upload the results. We paid salaries to the activists so that this could be their sole focus. We had a project manager who was in daily contact with the more than 100 activists. So it was constant communication. For those who did not have internet service, they would store the results of their surveys and upload at the earliest possible opportunity. When we couldn't do anything online, we had paper surveys. And then because we, especially in the LCC, have activists going back and forth into Turkey, they would bring stacks of papers. And so we have, I think, nearly all of the surveys, either in digital form or in paper form. I have to recognize and pay respect to the activists who did this work. I can't overstate the magnitude of the danger they faced. Unfortunately, we lost 2 activists during the course of the work. And so we have sort of made this for them. It's for the Syrian people, but we recognize them in particular. And we had an activist was critically injured in Quneitra during the course of his work. In some cases, especially in the Damascus suburbs, we were ordered to stop operations or else, and so we stopped.
And it's fair to say, I mean, a lot of people initially, when they were looking at this and they're looking at the branding and the colour, would say, well, this is an opposition document. But it's fair to say that a lot of the people on the ground, as well as the LCCs, obviously, but you had a lot of independent activists as well with really no affiliation other than wanting possibly a Syria where you could actually do this sort of thing without being repressed.
Yes, many people will say it is an opposition document. But which Syrian is going to dispute the right of any Syrian to offer an opinion? We asked questions, and people were encouraged to respond with whatever they believed. When we were designing and piloting the actual questionnaire, we wanted it to be such that, given the opportunity, we could ask Bashar al-Assad himself, can you take a little survey? The vast majority of us are part of the opposition. The vast majority of us want freedom and dignity and justice for our people. I don't think this puts us in the same camp as the armed opposition or those who call themselves the formal opposition, the political opposition.
And one last question before we open it out. So obviously, in terms of where, if you like, the formal opposition, the National Coalition are going, they've recently, in a sense, agreed a set of basic principles which, you know, they will talk about equality and they will talk about freedom and they will talk about justice. How much they've got the ability to implement any of that is another thing. But in some senses, those people who want to see an effective transition, a transition based on a rights-based agenda, that's actually a positive move that they're going in. So how much is this work that you're doing influencing that, engaged with the coalition, maybe through the LCCs who have a sort of love-hate relationship with the coalition? Is there any connection with the formal coalition at the moment?
So we're in kind of an awkward position. We certainly want to engage with the body that claims to represent Syrians politically. At the same time, we want this to stay independent of the coalition. And so I will be hopefully engaging with them this weekend in Istanbul. I'd like to get individual members to sign on, but I don't feel that it would be wise to have the coalition stamp of approval on it, because I personally, and I think my organization and the activists who worked on this, we want this to be the kind of document that any Syrian, regardless of political perspective, can look at and comment on and hopefully sign.
Okay, good. So let's open it up to questions and answers. Put your hand up. There's a lot of people putting their hand up at the moment. And if you want to say who you are, if you represent an organization, how do you want to do this? Do you want to take one at a time? Do you want to take 3 at a time? What's better for you?
Let's start with one at a time.
One at a time. You had your hand up first, and then I'll come here, and then I'll go there. So here.
Hello, thank you very much. It's very interesting to hear about this project. I think it's just amazing. You
Gaziantep, Turkey. In fact, that's where we did the pilot. We talked to people at Kilis refugee camp in Turkey. We talked to people in Lebanon and in Jordan. I think we had a few respondents in Egypt, but we were trying to focus to the extent we could on inside or immediately surrounding. In the next phase, we want to go global.
Okay. We've got a roving mic, actually. We've got a microphone, yeah. Mohammed, you had a question.
Thank you. Mustafa Hayat Dawlati Foundation from Syria. Could you please briefly describe what kind of questions you survived and also the results as well? Because just to have an idea about the survey itself.
Sure, and we're going to make this report publicly available. I don't know, Matthew's my colleague from FREE-Syria. I don't know if we can get it on the website today. But I'll just read to you a couple of the questions. Or you want to pick them at random? So
I'll pick one because there was one, it was page 14, which had some controversial results. So every Syrian has the right to vote and run for political office, yes or no. And actually, 86% of respondents said yes, 14% said no. 49% in Damascus said no. There was some interesting results. So, on the top line, you could say Syrian Freedom Charter talks about equality, talks about dignity, talks about, those various freedoms built within international human rights law and what have you. Drill down to the figures, actually. It actually is quite contested in different governorates. But, you haven't got that, which is a shame, but it breaks all these questions down. There's other questions on, let's have a look now. There was some on...
Let me...
Yeah.
One of the questions was every Syrian has the right to a fair trial with no exception. Some people said no. So in the revolution for justice and dignity and freedom, we still had people saying no. Now, some of them simply don't believe that all Syrians are equal. Some felt that if applied to the Assad regime, they should not have a fair trial. Still, others had their own beliefs. The challenge for us was to accept opinions regardless of our own and record them. There were 18 questions in all, and with some of them, there would be follow-up and discussion. I can relay to you some sort of anecdotes. At one time, an older gentleman actually started crying because his opinion had never been asked, requested, or valued in any way. Some people, especially in Gaziantep, where we thought they might say, we've just escaped from hell. What do you mean you want my opinion on, the right to vote? And Bilakis, they were so thirsty to speak. Some of them said, I know you have more work. Come back. Here's my phone number. I want to talk more.
It is interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of the questions in here, for instance, do you agree equal pay for equal work for men and women? I mean, for a lot of people, including people who have a very good detailed understanding of what's going on in Syria, it's a question which seems so far away. Maybe, reflects the early months of the uprising when it wasn't militarized, but something so far away. But I think that's the point. If you're talking about transition and long-term transition and having a smart approach, it's going to take years. And, certainly as Amnesty always said in 2011, you're talking potentially about a 25, 30-year process here. It's good we have experts from the ANC, who, if you think about the Freedom Charter there, 1953? 55? Decades-long process towards emancipation and empowerment and equality, if you like. We had a question over here as well. Just wait for the microphone to come around.
Another question over there.
Yeah.
Oh, hi, Rafif. Thank you very much for your talk. And I just want to say it's a real pleasure to hear something positive about Syria for a change, because it's been such a dreary news item for so long. You mentioned something about the extremists in the non-regime areas and how there was a certain opposition to someone doing surveys and asking people about their opinions. And I wanted to bring up the elephant in the room, so to speak, which is religion. Now, the surveys, the idea, the narrative you've got is actually, it's fantastic. But we know that Syria is a very conservative, very religious society. And I wanted to know, have you any plans to get, shall we call it buy-in from moderate religious figures who might be in the opposition, who might find this to be very interesting, and then help to kind of internalize the logic that you're using here so that people wouldn't see it as something alien or secular or different? Thank you.
That's a great question. I don't think we're looking for buy-in, right? Because to get buy-in, we would have to modify what 50,000 people said they wanted. I think we're looking for debate and discussion. And if people can look at this as principles that may evolve with Syria, that need to reflect majority opinions, if these are principles that Syrians can live with regardless of their religious background, I think that would be good. Can I convince somebody that this is a good thing? Maybe. But will I violate the principles we started with? Absolutely not. And if they don't buy in, they're entitled to that. And we encourage them to tell us why they don't buy into it, right? One of the impressive figures in this is that I think more than 36% of people actually chose not to state their religious background. It was an optional question. And for many, they said, I'm Syrian, and that's all you need to know. And that was really heartening given the kinds of news we hear about Islamists and growing radicalization.
We had a question here, then I'll come here, and then there. Yeah. No, here first. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rafif, for your talk. So I want to ask you, did you choose respondents from a certain socioeconomic background, or was it random? And did you actually do the survey in ISIS-controlled areas? Thank you.
We selected the respondents at random. We weren't targeting any socioeconomic category, but we were specifically not trying to reach the intellectuals or the elite. We wanted this to be sort of quote-unquote the man or the woman on the street, right? Now, when we conducted the actual surveys, ISIS, as an acronym, was not nearly as prevalent throughout the country as it is today. But we had Jabhat al-Nusra, we had Ahrar al-Sham, we had those types of groups who were very opposed to our work. And in one case, as I think I mentioned, we had to completely shut down operations. And I think eventually, some of those people may want to weigh in on this. Well, we're not, this is a civilian effort, right? So we're not looking for military opinions here. But I think with the right kind of momentum, I think some of the Syrian militants will come around and want to voice their opinion.
And as you said, the act of actually doing this and garnering opinion does draw up, want some positives, as our friend there was saying, but also the elephant in the room, to use your phrase as well. Those discussions, we see them happening in government circles all the time. What will be the future legal structure of Syria, for instance? You've got Sharia courts already well set up, whereas you'll have others like, human rights organizations promoting international human rights law. And, there's an interesting, let's say, non-violent battle going on there about what we and a certain amount of Syrians think would be a better way of protecting civilians and citizens' rights. But then possibly from a demographic perspective, more Syrians thinking, no, we disagree, we want to go down this road. That's going to be a challenge in itself, but hopefully initiatives like this will let people do it via conversation as opposed to Kalashnikovs, and I think that should be the point. I had a question here as well.
Mazen Jbai, founder and director of Help for Syria UK. First, thank you so much for the initiative. Definitely great work. It's two questions. First, about you and the foundation. When you started, have you approached other Syrian communities and Syrian organizations based in the UK to start your work, or it was like an exclusive, secretive something in the beginning? My question is because I never heard of that before, and I've like definitely never been approached. Two, you said when you done your statistic and questions inside Syria, you tried to cover most of the areas. Can you tell me, have you covered every single cities, whether like areas under government control or other areas? Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you. So the answer to your first question is no and no. Did we approach organizations in the UK? No. Were we secretive? No. We have been talking about the Freedom Charter for about a year in social media. We've been promoting it through our organization and through events where we can have an audience. What we're doing in the next phase of the project is approaching organizations not just in the UK or in the United States, but around the world where there is a Syrian community, where we can get volunteers, and perhaps you'll join us in collecting Syrian voices and in reaching out to your friends and family inside Syria. We want this to be truly something by Syrians for Syrians, right? Now, did we go to every single city? No, this would be impossible. But maybe you can help us get to every single city. This is going to take years to get to every single city, right? Some of those cities are already destroyed. Some were destroyed before we could even get there, and some we simply could not penetrate. But I think if we get the momentum, we need to hear from every standing city. We need to hear from every opinion, every Syrian. So I think you're volunteering to help us in the UK. I think I heard you say that.
I say this, have you approached other organizations which is involved in the Syrian issue, whether it's a humanitarian or the peace platforms and so on, because these are the organizations which have link and communication and networks inside Syria, just like the international community rely on the Syrian small NGOs to reach the areas they cannot reach it. It's the same with your study and research, and it needs as many people involved to get your statistic
Absolutely.
as correct as possible.
This is what we're trying to launch now. So I have approached organizations in the United States because that's where I'm based. That's sort of the first push for me in terms of public outreach outside of Syria. I will be in Ireland on Thursday doing the same thing. I will be in Istanbul on Friday doing the same thing, and I will be back in Gaziantep over the weekend to do the same thing. And when I go back to Washington, we are engaging more members of the Syrian community. And as we get the word out, and again, I heard you volunteer for this, we want to have more and more people having the conversation. I don't need to be everywhere, but I need people like you to be in your community and with your sphere of influence and your network to spread the word.
I can see a nice relationship developing. And I should say as well, Mazen's part of a number of networks, including a Syrian Platform for Peace, which again, Syrian-led, good thing to connect, something part of the extension project. The other thing as well is, this sort of work, transition work, it doesn't make the headlines. It never is going to. I mean, Rafif's a core member of the Day After project, who released a huge report. I don't know how many people have heard of it, but a big report back in 2012, looking at security sector reform, rule of law reform, all the things you need to do to really have an effective transition and some form of stable government for when there was a transition, the regime falls, or whatever it might be, and a part of that was constitutional design as well. So a lot of this work is happening, not necessarily in secret or in the underground. I mean, some of it has to because by its nature it's dangerous, but it's never going to make headline news, and that's part of the issue in a sense.
And I can follow up with, I approached. So in my capacity with FREE-Syria and in my capacity as a spokesperson for the LCC, and in some of the work I've done that has been extremely public, I've come across a great many journalists. And I have approached a couple of them saying, can we get some airtime or space on the Freedom Charter? Can we get some publication runs on this? And I'm told, you know, I'm sorry, it's not a headline because ISIS just did this or that or the other. And so, you know, the Freedom Charter cannot compete with ISIS for a headline, right? So again, we have to go to our own community, regardless of our political opinions, and say, can we look at this as a way to bridge gaps? Can we look at this to stimulate a dialogue about what we want as Syrians for the future? Syria, as we knew it, is no longer. So looking forward, what is Syria going to look like? How are we going to help shape it? Are we going to help shape it? Right?
Chap at the back with the white shirt, yeah? And then I'll come here, and then I'll come here. And then there, yeah. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for a really interesting presentation. Apologies, I missed the start, so you may have addressed this. The question is, heard you loud and clear, this is an initiative by Syrians for Syrians. Many of us in the room are advocates or have the capacity to be active and on the crisis. So are there recommendations to international actors, whether it's Staffan de Mistura, the UN Special Envoy, or others? Is it that they, or rather even things that they should not do to allow the space for this to grow and retain its legitimacy and have impact?
Thank you for that. So there are multiple answers to a reasonably complex question. So first, absolutely, there are millions of people around the world who have been supportive of Syrians and who have worked tirelessly to make sure the issue of Syria remains at the forefront of discussion. And Matthew, my excellent program assistant and keeper of sanity, came up with a brilliant idea. As part of the website, allow space for non-Syrians to give their opinion or endorsement or ask questions, because you all have worked so hard. You're almost honorary Syrians, and you deserve to have an opinion, of course. In terms of international initiatives, we're hoping that by gaining some momentum, we can approach the internationals, and Staffan de Mistura would be one of them. Really, any party or institution that has a hand in shaping Syria's future should know what the people of Syria want, and should know if we're adding signatures, if there's momentum, if we're reaching 100,000 or 200,000. These are things they need to know as they form their own policy narratives.
Extending that a little bit then, we talk about the international community as a concept, then surely there's outreach to be done with the Russian government, the Iranian government, non-state actors like Hezbollah, who have a say.
They need to be aware of the demands of the Syrian people. I personally don't want Hezbollah weighing in on the Freedom Charter, but you know, people need to know about the work. They need to know about the results. One of my fears, personal fears, in undertaking this work was that I would see results I didn't like. You know, what if the majority say they want a Sharia state? What if the majority say women should not just not receive equal pay but shouldn't work? You know, what if? And I realized I can't influence this. This has to be an honest body of work, and it is. So when the time is right and Hezbollah gets to weigh in on it, I don't know that any Syrian really cares about Hezbollah's opinion, but they are an influencing party in Syria, and they need to know what we're thinking.
Sure. We had a question here, the white shirt, yeah? And then I'll come there. And then I'll come there.
Thanks. Jonathan Brown. I'm one of the non-Syrian activists. I've been campaigning inside the Liberal Democrat Party here to inform MPs. And one of the things I'm often asked, actually, is, but what do Syrians think? So I think this is a really great initiative. My question is, I know you have tried, but how representative of Syrian views do you think it is currently? And sort of in the longer run, if it gets momentum, Presumably you do actually need and want groups, militias and so on, to back this, because otherwise how does it become anything more than just a list of demands on a piece of paper?
Okay. I got to think about that. How representative is it? It is as representative as we were able to make it. So as we went through each governorate, we took proportional, we created goals proportionately to the population. And we went out, again, random sampling. So we have tried to include as many diverse voices as possible. Does it represent every Syrian? Of course not, right? We were making a joke earlier about how if you get 4 Syrians in the room, you might have 8 opinions. So, you know, but the extension project is an opportunity for those who feel they were not represented to weigh in. So it's open to all Syrians. In terms of outreach to militias or an armed, so let's just call them combatants, right? We can certainly try. We can certainly try. My personal belief is that we need to get civilians behind this. And if the militias want to weigh in a civilian context, of course they're welcome to.
I'm going to come here now, and I'm going to go, yeah, keep your hand up, yeah.
I guess one question, I mean, you mentioned earlier that, you know, if an opinion reached 50%, then, you know, you would look at it and include it in the charter. So I guess I'm interested in what, you know, what didn't make the cut? You know, what were the freedoms or the rights that, for example, were 49% or 20%, and you just didn't include them in the charter? I guess the second question is, you talked about, for example, the opposition from Jabhat al-Nusra or Ahrar al-Sham to the work that you were doing. I was wondering if you could expand on, you know, that more a little bit, you know, in terms of other groups, other geographies and all that. And the third question is this in Arabic?
Yeah.
In terms of the report and also the actual text itself.
All right, so what were the things that did not make the cut? Expand on the combatants, okay, and was this in Arabic? Okay, so let me mix up the order. First of all, this was done entirely in Arabic and translated into English. The survey instrument was done in Arabic by Syrians who struggled with the language. Any Syrian who's been involved in committees knows that we always establish committees. And there's the committee of composition, and there's the committee of review, and there's all the committees were established. This was done entirely in Arabic. And then translated for a non-Arabic speaking audience. We've not yet translated it into French, but I think you just volunteered for that. What were the questions that didn't make the cut? I honestly do not remember off the top of my head, but if we can get your contact information, we will send you the answer. And in fact, that's a good question to put on the website, Matthew, so that we stimulate some dialogue there. Expand on what with the combatants?
You mentioned like Jabhat al-Nusra and Ahrar al-Sham. It's just a bit more background. I mean, you know, why did they oppose, or you know, what was the context, or how did that become? Were there other groups, for example? Because like, we know like Jabhat al-Nusra, Ahrar al-Sham are, I guess, mainly from a certain, let's say, affiliation or ideological affiliation. Did that go across the spectrum of, let's say, Islamism, for example, in the combatants across Syria?
Oh, you know, that's a pretty detailed question, and I don't know that there was that much thought put into the different levels of militarization or Islamization. I really don't know the answer to, I don't know how to answer that. So that's another thing I have to either come back to you on or say, you know, we didn't.
We'll come back to that. And you can get you can download the Freedom Charter in Arabic on the website. Yes, just wait for the microphone.
Hi, I'm Maurice Hegarty from the Irish Syria Solidarity Movement. Just listening to you talk about the amount of work that went into doing it, you know, training people, having hundreds of people do the work, getting funded to do that. And obviously, you're putting that out now globally, and you're wanting to work more extensively inside Syria. So it's going to become an even bigger operation. How are you hoping to go forward in terms of funding it? And what can we do to support you in that?
Thank you, Maurice. I need to mention that Maurice joined us for one of our workshops in Gaziantep to relay her experience as an Irish woman, as somebody who's done a lot of work in the space of peace and reconciliation. And so many of our activists developed a relationship with Maurice that continues today. Now that we're at this stage of the project, looking to extend it, we are seeking funding to continue the work. This is publicly available information. The initial project was funded by the United States Department of State. I had a lot of reservations about taking on a US government-funded effort for, I think, obvious reasons. And I have to tip my hat to the Americans on this one. They never once put pressure on us to guide the project in a particular way. They were extremely respectful of our desire to make this about Syrians with no interference from an American perspective. So fortunately, they just wrote the check and we provided reports, but that was it. Going forward, we are looking for international funding, in part because, at least I believe, that Syria is an international issue. And the question of the loss of humanity and what we're seeing in Syria is a global problem. And this is about the voice of people needing to be elevated to the top. And I think internationally there is a world responsibility to help. So we were fortunate enough to meet with the Foreign Office yesterday in Dublin. As you know, because you've organized it, we're meeting with your foreign ministry and your Senate. And we are going to be approaching other donor nations as well.
And I think there's a lot to be said about mixing up your possible funding streams as well. So yes, there's the big, government departments that work on human rights and democracy promotion and whatever. There's also the bad branding that can be associated with that. But there's also looking at it, which would fit this model quite well around crowdsourcing, reaching out to the Syrian community in the diaspora, microfinancing a project like this as well.
Yeah, we would love that. I mean, my ask of all of you is to read it first and then make some noise on Facebook and Twitter. Follow FREE-Syria. Look at what we're doing with the Freedom Charter. Give us your opinions. Give us your feedback. Give us your advice. If you think we can start crowdfunding, let's do that. If we think we need to approach a particular NGO, let's do that. But we always have our own condition. We will not accept conditional funding. We won't skew the results. We won't try to guide people in a certain way. This is about what people believe, and they have to be able to express that honestly.
There's potential tension points, though, isn't there, coming up? Because I think in this country, if you scratch the surface, if you did big surveys, you've got a social attitude survey, I think it's every 2 years, isn't it? And I think it's every 2 years, there's those questions on, do you support the reintroduction of the death penalty? Mm-hmm. And over 50%, over 60% actually, of British people surveyed support it in certain cases. But we don't have it. So there's that question as well as what the Syrians want, but also what's going to be better for an effective, stable society where people's rights are protected. So there is definitely some tension points to think about going forward.
As with any country, right?
Yeah.
As with any nation where you can voice your opinion, you are not likely to have 100% agreement.
No,
right?
of course.
So I think that's just normal.
Yeah.
What we want to do is create a space for us to disagree or to agree.
Yeah, exactly. More questions. We've got one here. I am going to come to the back. I will come back to you again. Yeah. Keep your hand up, though.
Hi, I'd like to know a bit more about the support process. So as you were saying, the kind of just the process of asking the question is itself a huge empowerment exercise. So I'd like to know a bit about the education and protection mechanisms that go along with this process. Perhaps what you've learnt, so your experience so far, and how that might change and develop in the future.
Okay. I'm not sure I understand your question. Maybe you can hang on to the mic.
Okay.
The education and protection process?
Yeah, so in terms of human rights and humanitarian protection, just the process of asking these questions itself kind of makes the people that engage become humanitarian actors.
Okay. In terms of the process of asking the questions, and I can only relay feedback from the teams that were actually on the ground surveying. I didn't do this. Some people didn't put things in classical terminology. A lot of the majority want state-funded education and state-funded infrastructure and free health insurance, and of course the government should pay for, dental and vision. Okay, they don't wrap that in a political terminology, but they were asked to think, what does that mean if the state funds it? Where does the state get the money from? Oh, okay, we have to pay taxes. Well, we don't really do that. It was thought-provoking, and it stimulated thought, but we can't educate in the sense that we can't steer opinion. In terms of protection, do you mean as in security? Or?
I'm interested as to whether the process of answering these questions, whether there was any human rights education that went along with it, and then after having asked the questions, is there any kind of mechanism for support for people that have been perhaps awakened to human rights and engaged in the process?
That would be a wonderful initiative, but I don't think that was within our mandate. We were not there, and we didn't undertake this to educate. We undertook this to be educated, really. What do Syrians want to say, and where do their opinions converge or not? Certainly, I think for those who responded, they've had some sort of an awakening in that their opinion was solicited, but it wasn't in the mandate of the work to educate them.
It's a good point to hold on to.
Yes.
It is. We'll come back to that, I think, in the extension project, because it is a good point. And where, for instance, there's been tensions in certain areas, maybe controlled by groups like Jabhat al-Nusra and Ad al-Sham, maybe because it's something new to them and haven't been involved in the beginnings of the discussion. There is things you can learn from the humanitarian sector on aid access, for instance, where often aid agencies, the UN and whatever, are having to go through checkpoints controlled by these groups, and they're getting through because there's a conversation happening, which is interesting in that sense. But I think there is a lot to learn from the humanitarian side. This really wouldn't be a humanitarian project in that sense, though. It's more around a civil society development, but definitely something to pick up on. Right at the very back, you had your hand up, yeah.
Thank you, Rafif, for the great job you have done to produce this charter. But actually, as a Syrian, I strongly agree with the charter.
I'm sorry, you agree or disagree?
Agree.
Agree.
Strongly.
We need it. We have a signature.
Yes, because
one.
Because it matches the fundamental objectives of the Syrian revolution, and that's why our people came down to the street. But to be fair, things changed a lot ever since the start of the revolution. And if I look at the coalition, the Syrian coalition, the main reason they fail is because they don't have a real influence in the ground. Like, don't you believe if we want to deliver and secure this charter, we need a powerful people on the ground to sign it, like the combat groups? Isn't that important? The other thing, I believe there's something missing in the charter, which is the unity. Did you ask Syrians whether they prefer a united state? Because in some areas, for example, in the Kurdish area, many Kurds want to have their independence. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Do we need powerful people to sign it? We need as many Syrians as possible to sign it. And again, we're not doing a survey of combatants. We're doing a survey of civilians. We're asking the people who have really very little voice to make their voice heard. Now, again, if combatants want to sign it, if they read this and they don't kill us, maybe they'll be interested in learning more or getting an education and changing their way of thinking, and maybe they can be encouraged to sign. The question of a united state, and you raised the Kurdish question specifically. Thank you for pulling that. So it's contained in the report. The question was, translated into English, how do you define the geographical map of the Syrian state? And with an autonomous Kurdish state was one set of responses, and it's tiny. I don't know if you can see the chart. It's the bright blue. If you've got, yeah, it's bright blue. The vast majority want the current borders. The second majority wanted to stress that it was the current borders and the occupied territories. We have a few copies that we can distribute, and we'll get it online as soon as possible. No, I'm not saying...
Over the microphone.
Sorry, you're talking about the Golan, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not say Alexandria.
West Bank.
Oh. Yeah, sorry, yeah. So can you be a bit more precise about that? You say others want the borders with the occupied territories. Are you saying the others don't want the occupied territories or are happy with the ceasefire line with Israel, for example?
No, I'm not saying that at all.
Okay.
I'm simply saying that the way the respondents responded, the majority said current borders.
Current borders,
Current
without being
borders.
specific. Yeah.
Right. Others specified that they wanted to, that the occupied territories should be included. But I mean, I'm not passing judgment, right?
Again, another issue that has been bubbling around with opposition circles and their relation, especially the relationship with the Americans. And you get opposition people saying, well, the Golan is ours and it's our right to want it back. It causes a lot of tension. Sure. More questions. I will come to you, Mazen, again. But I'm just going to see if anyone else who hasn't asked a question wants to ask a question. You've asked a question, I remember. Okay, let's go back to Mazen.
Without a doubt, the Freedom Charter for the Syrian people has to be by the Syrian people. We have to find out through the Syrian people. We have to reach all the sectors of religion, geographically, and everything. People inside Syria and outside Syria. My only worry here is when you ask the Syrian people inside Syria, in certain areas, they are not in the normal circumstances. They are under severe pressure based on the surrounding. So that particular time, when you ask the people who are under ISIS control, different than the people under the regime control, this is not normal time to ask them. I am sure if these people left Syria and they are in the right frame of mind, in the right condition, they will think and answer you differently than the way they surround them. I take this from humanitarian work. When we do project inside Syria, it's completely the demand and the condition. When you are under government control, then liberated area by Free Syrian Army, or liberated area by ISIS, or by besieged area. So I'm not sure how accurate you can take the opinions of people under these circumstances. Whether you have to rely more on the people outside Syria, they have the time and the condition to think and give you the right answer or not.
So that's not really a question, but a comment. And I agree with you in the sense that Syrians who live in Syria are not, Saved by the Bell, are not experiencing a normal life. But I will say, I, for one, am not prepared to wait until Syrians experience a normal life. Their opinions are going to evolve no matter what, right? As we grow older, as our life circumstances change, our opinions change. This is a snapshot in time, and we can only extend it. And we need to give Syrians a voice. I think the opinions of those inside count more because they are the ones living under siege. Those of us who live abroad are living in relative luxury, in relative security, and our opinion matters because of our Syrianness. But we are not lacking world attention, and we're not under siege. So I actually believe those inside have more, I believe their opinion carries more weight. And if I could give them, let's say, 3 percentage points more, I would, but I can't. Now that's my personal opinion, and I could be wrong. And so when the space is available on the website, put in that comment. Let's see if people agree with you or disagree. I mean, you know. I agree with you.
We are driving to achieve something for the future.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to envision the future. No food, no drink, besieged, and all these things. We envision free Syria, where the people are all equal and freedom. So their need at that time, and their opinion about the charter, would differ from now.
Absolutely. Their perspective may change over time. What we found was that the people who talked to our activists were willing to talk. They wanted to talk. They could have said, I don't have time for this, I need to go find bread. You know, in many of the besieged areas, people resorted to eating cats. People resorted to eating grass just to survive. Nobody said, I don't want to talk to you, I want to go find food. They said, I want to make my opinion known. So I feel that it's not up to me to decide when the right time is. If people want to talk, I think we need to listen, and I think we need to make their wishes and desires known. And I think this gives us an opportunity to have hope for the future, and I think hope has to begin today. And not deferred. It should not be deferred to the future.
You had another question, yeah.
My only other question was that I know there are at least 2 Palestinian Syrians in this room, and what impact on the questionnaire have they had, if any, do you know? Was there a question in the questionnaire about them? Because obviously they're in
Syria, yes,
double
and
trouble.
Traditionally part and parcel of the Arab consciousness.
Yep.
Let me go back to the question, because I honestly don't remember what it was. Do you know what number that was? You said you saw a question specific to the Palestinian question, or are you asking? I don't remember anything specifically to the Palestinian question, because they are affected twice, in a sense, yes. I don't think we had any focus there.
I mean, one of the interesting things about how this has been done, to my eyes, is it's looking at something above sect, above ethnicity, above all the different identity politics, as it were, to say, try and develop a new understanding of what it means to be Syrian. You do that through a constitution, you do that through a constitutional process and what have you, but something above, without the nastiness of nationalism, as it were, which is part of the interesting aspect of this.
But we should probably take closer
Yeah.
look at that, you know?
Yeah.
So that's a good suggestion.
Amjad, and then I'll come to you. Yeah.
So when did you complete this work, and when is it going to be published?
So this will be published as soon as Matthew can get the PDF up on the website. We completed the work last September. Last year. And now we're moving towards the extension project.
Mm-hmm. You had a question at the back, yeah? Put your hand up again. Yeah.
I just wanted to pick up on the point about Palestinian Syrians, because my guess reading this, the first point under all Syrians are equal, where it says that all Syrians are equal regardless of their religion, nationality or gender, and at first I thought that was a bit of an odd word to have in the middle there, but then I assumed that was because of the issue of Palestinian Syrians in particular, that issue of nationality was being raised under the umbrella of being Syrian, if you see what I mean.
I'm sorry, what do you find odd? That it was all Syrians are equal? Or
Well, all Syrians are equal regardless of nationality. And the first thought would be Syrians have the same nationality, but then
Right.
I thought,
This is because this is translated from the Arabic, and so in Arabic it has a different connotation. And in Arabic, when you talk about nationality, you're talking about Palestinian, or you're talking about Kurdish, or you're talking about another ethnicity, if you will. But all Syrians, all people who carry Syrian citizenship, is what it specifically refers to. Pardon? Palestine, yes.
No.
No, they don't. You're right. You're right. But all Syrians, I think what it means really is translated from the Arabic. Do we have the Arabic version? Because we could read it in Arabic. All right. So how do you translate qawmiya better than nationality? Ethnicity? Okay.
Ethnicity, yeah.
All right. So we have to make the edit.
Yeah.
We've got a question.
Yep.
Why not including all grounds of discrimination if you did something and did it? Like, what's the point of only listing 3 grounds of discrimination other than saying all the grounds of discrimination? That would be, if you are drafting a basis for the future, it should be strong enough for the future, I think. You know what I mean?
I missed the first
I
part.
think that point, it's a point I've thought about as well, looking at this document as well, around discrimination. There's multiple forms of discrimination, multiple forms, and not every form of discrimination has been picked up in this. Maybe for the extension, when you extend this. And I would say that absolutely. I mean, I think some of the work we've done with Syrian activists, non-violence activists in Gaziantep as well, which is all nice. You talk about human rights and equality and whatever, and then you get to the crunch and you say, look, some of the difficulties you're going to face as activists going out and doing surveys as well and doing workshops are around things that you might be uncomfortable with. Discrimination against LGBTI communities. That's going to be an issue. There's around disability. There's a whole range that still need to be, I think, addressed. Hasn't been addressed fully in this. That doesn't mean to say it won't be.
So would the next stage of the survey be more developed, for example, to maybe contain more rights or more, like more variety? Or would it be like only this?
So that's a good question. My personal feeling is that this is the document we ended up with, and so it's going to stay like this. But as opinions evolve, as more people weigh in, I think we can amend it. I think we can say this was the initial document, and this is what we've learned hearing from more and more and more Syrians. And so certainly once it's available, weigh in and talk about other forms of discrimination that you think need to be addressed, and then let's see if there's a mechanism to discuss those.
I think it's almost inevitable that as this gets more publicity, more Syrians are engaged, people will say, well, I don't feel represented, I want a question, and it's inevitable, I think. There's a question way at the back. Yeah, just keep your hand up, though.
Hello. You've mentioned presenting the results of the survey to actors like the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad, Iran, Russia, Hezbollah, and so on. Well, then the question is, since when have these groups and some of the opposition groups like Jabhat al-Nusra and so on, since when have they cared about the public opinion of Syrians? So another question is, what realistically do you think that the impact of the survey will be on the policy of any actor in the Syrian conflict?
I don't think Bashar al-Assad is going to read the Freedom Charter and decide to stop dropping barrel bombs, right? I didn't say we wanted to approach them. I said they needed to know what the Syrian people are thinking and wanting. Just as a point of reference, I don't think it's going to have any influence on some of those policies. Maybe it will. Maybe with enough signatures, with enough support from Syrians that some opinions will be swayed. Maybe at the geopolitical or strategic level when foreign governments are deciding the fate of Syria and Syrians, maybe the voice of the people will factor in the decision-making process. And maybe it won't. But the point is, we will have made every effort to voice our opinion and to communicate what we want for our country in the future.
It's a critical point as well in sort of transition work, peace building, conflict resolution. You often hear the UN or governments or even NGOs say civil society must be included in the process. It's often really empty though, and it's often, you know, a few activists, selected activists who get to meet, you know, de Mistura or whatever, and it's like an hour meeting in Geneva or whatever. That's it, you tick a box. I think one of the interesting things about this is there's depth to it, you know, inside the country through the LCCs and through the different network of activists that have been used. And it's something tangible. It's initially over 50,000 opinions. It's not something that can be dismissed lightly. And, you know, something like this can create a gravitational pull, in a sense, where other groups, you know, it was being intimated there, that other groups need to be engaged in the diaspora and inside the country to try and create some sort of coalescence or even coalition. It's a dirty word, coalition, but some coalescence around these reasons. Then it's much more difficult to dismiss. Just as it's difficult for civil society to dismiss the geopolitics, right. I guarantee you can sit down, and we got a little bit this at the Foreign Office yesterday, where, you know, we were talking about the Saudi Arabian government's influence on what's happening in Syria. Do you really think the Saudi Arabian government are going to be happy with some of the things in here around equality for men and women, around voting, around the mere act of
we
serving?
Will drive.
So the geopolitics are there; they have to be taken account of as well. We've got time for a couple more questions. I'm going to come here as well. I want to get questions from people who haven't asked questions yet. Yeah.
Hey, you know, you said you were you got people randomly to answer the survey. So did you like try to sample in terms of like, let's get an equal number of men and women, let's do by age groups and things? Did you do that kind of sampling process?
The only thing I personally requested was that we aim to have 50% women. I'm always looking for 50%. I actually start with 90% and I'll negotiate down to 50. We were not able to get more than, I think, 20 or 30% of women, female respondents. In terms of age, we tried to keep it at above 18 of legal voting age, but that was it. Thank you. Good question.
27% women.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, we'll come back to you. Keep your hand up though so we can see you. Right at the back there. Yeah. Just wait for the microphone.
Before you ask the question, let me just, because it occurs to me, there's another anecdote for you specifically related to women, where our activists were almost equally down the middle, men and women, and when a couple of guys approached a couple, a man and a woman, in Gaziantep, they asked if they could ask the wife's opinion, and the husband said no. And so we sent our female surveyors to women and gathered them at coffee breaks and started talking to them. And that's how we were able to get more responses from women. So that's going to be a real challenge.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
My question was very similar, actually. Have you excluded people from the survey to try and ensure you've got a balanced sample? So if you're interviewing people in a free area where the controlling group is happy for people to talk, it'll be easy to get 1,000 responses. But if you're interviewing people in Tartus, then you'll be lucky to get 10. Have you reduced the numbers in terms of working out the percentages, like professional polling organizations do?
We didn't reduce numbers. We set target goals for each area on a proportionate basis, and then we tried to meet the goals. And where we could meet them, we did. And where we couldn't, we simply couldn't. So for example, in Damascus, I think we had set a goal of, I don't know, 10 or 15,000. We got 2,300, something like that, because that's what we were able to get. So we didn't exclude voices.
I think we've come slightly to the end, unless, Rafif, you've got some final words. I mean, it might be good just to reiterate again what needs to happen next in terms of the funding, getting the website developed, getting more engagement, part of the extension project.
It really is an ask. Read it, comment on it, help us to get the word out, help us to get funding for this at any level, help us get a dialogue going. You don't have to agree with it. I mean, I hope you do. I hope you'll sign it, but you don't have to agree. If you disagree, tell us why and tell us how we can improve the project. Tell us how we can work with more Syrians. If you feel it's not representative enough, help us reach communities you feel have not been represented. Keep it in the public narrative. So if you're on Twitter and you're on Facebook, keep retweeting or tweet things about it, or say, I listened to the Freedom Charter presentation and oh, it was so boring, or it was so terrible, how could they think? Create some discussion about it. Do it respectfully, please. Because a lot of people worked very, very hard in horrible conditions to communicate this.
And as I said, we're filming it, so we'll package that up, we'll put it online, we'll do a little write-up about it, we'll put all the links to the relevant organizations that have been involved. And that conversation carries on. Certainly Amnesty as well are going to be continuing to engage in this transition-based work. There's a whole other discussion to be had about how you actually get to an effective transition, and that's a different discussion to be had. Maybe we'll do that another time down the line. I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank you, Rafif, as well. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you.